What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Weekend Roundup here on Touchline Talk. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content going up on the channel. Couple different things to break down today, starting with the FA Cup. Quarterfinals are almost set as I'm recording this, waiting on that Nottingham Forest Ipswich Town game on Monday. But the thing I want to focus on here is what these results and the situation we have with these quarterfinalists could mean moving forward. Manchester City survive, so they're your one big six club, with Manchester United losing to Fulham in the shootout. They're your favorite, even in this weird season they're having. They're the team that's expected to be here, that expects to be competing for this trophy. Then you have Ipswich Town, if they're able to knock off Nottingham Forest. You have Preston North End still in there. But other than that, you have Aston Villa, Brighton, Fulham, Crystal Palace, Bournemouth, Nottingham Forest. Let's just assume for a second that Forest are your last quarterfinalist. Villa, Fulham, Brighton, Bournemouth, and Forest. If I counted correctly, that's 5 of your 8 teams are in serious contention for a Champions League, at least a Europa League spot, but very much still in the Champions League conversation, especially if England gets that 5th team. They are in the exact, we are in March as I'm recording this. They are in the exact same spot Manchester City are. Trying to make sure you qualify for the Champions League and having an opportunity to win a trophy here. That in and of itself is remarkable. I don't want to gloss over that, so I wanted to take a minute to specifically point that out. It's not just one, it's not just 2 teams. It's Bournemouth, it's Forest, it's Brighton, it's Fulham, it's Aston Villa. Then you have Crystal Palace, who couldn't do anything right the first couple months, but now are on this tear again, just like they were the second half of last season. They're probably not going to be able to get themselves into that conversation in terms of, top 8, things like that. But they also have an opportunity to win this. But specifically those 5 other teams that are navigating both the Champions League battle, the fight for the top 4, top 5, and the FA Cup. You just don't see teams who are able to do both. The one example I thought of was, that Leicester team that did win the FA Cup, but that team had Premier League winners on it. That team had finished 5th the season before and already gone through a Champions League battle. Right? They weren't doing this all for the first time. Because that's typically, right, these teams that are having these great seasons in the league, usually what gets sacrificed, as it did in the season Leicester won the league, are the domestic cups. But all of these teams have been able to do both and have been phenomenal in the league and now have an opportunity to get a trophy as well. Because most of the time you kind of have to choose, right? Either it's a cup competition or it's your league finish, which doesn't actually end in a trophy. It just ends in this really cool accomplishment of getting to play in the Europa League, Champions League, whatever it might be. You don't see teams get to do both. And if somebody knocks out Manchester City, there is a really, really good chance that there's going to be an opportunity for that to happen. That the team that goes on to win this, if it's not Manchester City, is also going to be battling for Champions League. And like I said before, all of these teams, or a majority of them, are in the exact same spot Manchester City are. They're focusing on the same things, trying to figure out how to balance making sure you get into the Champions League with also taking advantage of this opportunity now that you're this far into this tournament. It's a fascinating situation that really sets up an interesting last few rounds of the FA Cup here, because every one of these teams has an interesting story here. Even Manchester City, this all of a sudden becomes important because it's a trophy to win in a season that's not going well, that you're still not guaranteed to even be playing the Champions League next season. And for these other clubs, so Aston Villa has obviously been there before they qualified last season, so there's some comparison to Leicester there. But go back and look at the last time they won a domestic cup. right? This would be incredibly special for any of these teams, and they're all playing so well that they all have a great opportunity. That you don't feel like Manchester City are these clear favorites that they're just going to waltz their way through this thing, because that's not how this season has gone for them. These other teams, the Villas, the Bournemouths, are right on their level. So it's going to be really, really interesting now that Manchester United are out, and it is these teams that are having great seasons. Preston North End, a surging Crystal Palace, Ipswich if they can knock off Forest, and Manchester City. Really, really excited to see how this all plays out in the FA Cup. Also want to jump to Spain for 1 second before I get to some MLS stuff, because it's time to talk about Real Madrid again. I'm going to keep bringing this up. They played Real Betis over the weekend. Lost. That Real Betis starting lineup featured players such as U.S. international Johnny Cardoso, who was really, really good. Former Columbus Crew striker Cucho Hernandez. Antony, perhaps the worst signing in the history of Manchester United. Adrian was in goal. Premier League veteran you haven't thought about in a long time. And of course, Isco, captain, former Real Madrid player who was basically deemed to be expendable. You've got some other guys in there that played at big clubs and have since been kind of sent away. And it's not that Betis are bad. They're having a good season. They've had good seasons recently. They're one of the better teams in Spain. But we're talking about a guy that just came with... And Cucho Hernandez is a fantastic player. But we're talking about guys who just came from MLS. Guys who Real Madrid didn't have any use for. A guy that Manchester United was trying to do anything they could to get rid of. And they didn't just beat Real Madrid. They dominated them statistically. You look at the XG, you look at the shots on, the total shots. This was not a very competitive game. And so Real Madrid are now back to third in La Liga, looking up at both Barcelona and Atletico Madrid. By the way, those two teams also qualified automatically for the round of 16 in the Champions League, finished higher in the table than Real Madrid did. So by any metric you're looking at here, domestic league, Champions League, Real Madrid are the third best team in Spain. The only thing they really have to point to this season is that they beat Manchester City in the Champions League, and that doesn't even mean that much because City are the fourth, fifth best team in England. I've been saying this and saying this and saying this. Just factually speaking, until Real Madrid do something, because that's the other difference this season, is that they don't have this dominant Champions League run. Now, maybe they go on to win the competition, and then we're having a different conversation, to a certain extent. But for right now, until they do something to suggest differently, they're just simply the third best team in Spain. And by the way, Antonio Rudiger and David Alaba were starting at center back in this game. Mbappe was out there. Vinicius was out there. They're really... Yes, the bench was short-handed. They're not at full strength. But it's not like they were missing all their center backs. They were missing their stars in attack. They just got outplayed by one of the world's best collections of strange big club cast-offs, interesting rising emerging players with connections to the US and MLS. It's been happening. It happened again. They're not delivering. They're not living up to expectations. And I'm going to hold them accountable to it. Because we seem to let a lot slide because of Champions League success, and I have just never bought into that. It is a silly way to look at things. Domestic leagues have to matter. And this season, whatever way you look at it, they're just the third best team in Spain. Do with that what you want, but it has to mean something. Either the other two teams deserve way more credit, or we need to start asking some questions of Real Madrid because they're radically underperforming, and it's probably a combination of both. But That's what happened this weekend. Recent Champions League results. Wanted to bring that up again, particularly because it was that team with that set of players who beat them so convincingly. Finally, a couple thoughts on Major League Soccer week 2 of the season, match day 2. 3 teams in particular that started this season 2-0 that are kind of noteworthy. First of all, San Jose. Don't have too much to say. They haven't played the best opposition. But this is Bruce Arena. This is a bunch of MLS vets. This is a guy like Chicho Arango, who I still think is underappreciated and is one of the most valuable players in the league when he's going. You saw what he did the first half of last season for RSL. I think his importance to LAFC was wildly undersold. Arena went and got some of his guys from New England. He did this exact thing in New England and put together the best regular season in the history of the league. He's trying to do the same thing, and I'm not betting against him. I'm not surprised that they started well. We'll see if they can keep this up. We'll see how they stack up against the best teams in the Western Conference. But the idea that he can turn this around immediately, not surprising in the slightest to me. Good win for Vancouver as well, beating the LA Galaxy, late Brian White goal to decide that one. This is a team, usually you kind of just know what to expect because they've got this high floor because of Brian White, because of Ryan Gauld. But also there have been, coaching change. The rest of the league continues to get better. You've got a new X Factor in there in San Diego. Would you be shocked if they finish more in the 4, 5, 6 range and are battling for home field advantage in the playoffs? No. Would you be shocked if they're more in the battling for the 10 seed just trying to sneak in? No. So they're a team that I have a really hard time getting a pulse on, but so far so good. Very promising results early. And the other point I want to make on this real quick before I get to the third team. Inter Miami already dropped points. Galaxy off to a bad start. FC Cincinnati, going to talk about this game in a minute, just lost to the Philadelphia Union and got thumped. The Supporters' Shield race could get real interesting here. Of course, you can't draw any conclusions yet, but A, the Galaxy were not the best team in the league last season. They played the best in the playoffs. Those are two different things. They also traded their striker. They moved around some things in the midfield. They don't have Ricky Puig right now. I think they're just going to take a step back, and they're probably more like the 4th best team in the West until they get Ricky Puig back, which is theoretically going to happen before the playoffs, which is all that matters, and then we're having a different conversation. But the teams that you were looking at to win the Supporters' Shield, I feel like everybody was picking Inter Miami and FC Cincinnati. And Miami did bounce back with a win without Messi in convincing fashion against the Dynamo. But there have been points dropped there already. And then you go to this Cincinnati-Philadelphia game. This was the story of the weekend in MLS. And now you have seen the Union go into Orlando, handle business, and then go home and crush Cincinnati in a place they could not win games to save their lives last season. But when they were good was a fortress, and they were doing this to teams consistently throughout the season, and specifically kind of the summer months in those seasons when they were so good in that stretch when they were the best team in the league. This is just one of the most interesting off-season experiments I have ever seen. Ernst Tanner just decided that anybody who wasn't going to align with him philosophically needed to go. That means Jim Curtin, that means Jack McGlynn. He brought in Bradley Carnell to do exactly what he wanted to do. And Ty Faribo has 5 goals. Defensively, they've been pretty good. You got, Kevin Sullivan played in this game. Frankie Westfield has gone from a very, very good MLS Next Pro player to a starter, at least right now, for this team. You let your longtime center back go to Chicago. No issues there. New piece in the midfield looks fantastic. I mean, you can just go down the list. This is, can they keep it up? Who knows? But the quality of opposition and the way they have looked doing it is what separates them from the other teams that have had surprisingly good starts to this season. That's a Cincinnati team that could win the CONCACAF Champions League or Champions Cup, excuse me. That many people were picking to win the league. They could not do anything. They couldn't get the ball across midfield. The Union press was just smothering them. And the big names were out there. Vander eventually created a special moment to get a goal. Kevin Denke was out there. I mean, it's not like Cincinnati just took this game off. Yes, they did some rotation because they've got bigger concerns coming up in the Champions Cup. But it's not like they just played a B team out there. And they were so far off it. I was very, very skeptical of what the Union were doing this offseason. The Bradley Carnell hire made sense for what was clearly happening here, as did the Jack McGlynn trade. The problem is, though, when you were going to be that married to a style of play and say, our multi-time coach of the year is the problem, and our most promising, proven prospect was part of the problem, you have to be right or you're getting fired. That's where Ernst Tanner is. But he has been incredibly vindicated through 2 games. Again, can they keep it up? We'll see. But there is enough talent there that I still do believe last season was an aberration and weird things were happening, as opposed to that was the end. But you just never know when you push the reset button. And this is a very different team. They know exactly what they want to do. And so far, they've been the best team in the league. Again, it's 2 games. It's early. Part of this is also probably not having to play in CONCACAF Cup, Champions Cup. You just have this to focus on right now, as opposed to the Cincinnatis and all of the other teams that the Union have been competing with typically over the past 5-6 seasons. But this is the story so far. Is they are scoring goals for fun. It seems like every time they take a shot, it goes in the back of the net. Defensively, they've looked solid. Yes, they've given up some goals, but it's when the games have already been over. They have 3 strikers with goals already. The new designated player just got on the field. He immediately came on and scored, so he's gonna become a bigger part of this as well. I mean, that's your story in MLS so far. Who knows where it goes from here, but very impressive start for Bradley Carnell and the Union. That is all for this edition of the Weekend Roundup. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. I'll see you next time.